they said I could only speak for 10 to 15 minutes, so we're just going to introduce 3 concepts and then discuss. And these concepts are very important for as the foundation of what you're doing this semester. We're going to look at what is race, what is racialization, and what is racism, and how they're different, but how they intertwine with each other. So, I always use this graphic when I'm talking about issues of race, that we mostly can see the tip of the iceberg, but the more you study it, the more you think, the more you examine, the closer you look, you find how deep it goes in our society. And it goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Okay, so what is race? Race actually differs in definitions across the world. We have a unique definition, and in fact, nowhere else in North America or South America do we have this definition. So let's look at what it is in the US. So we classify human groups as exclusive and discrete. Okay, how do we do that? Based on socially selected physical characteristics, and we know, of course, skin color, hair type, and so on. We don't use ear shape, we don't use foot size. We selected certain things by which to be the markers of. And sometimes it doesn't work, right? And you get confused and you want to ask the person, what or who are you? Because it doesn't immediately. But we learn this shortly after birth, how to classify people according to these groups. Now, groups were created or evolved distinct from one another. So that is a belief in the United States, that racial groups are separate entities. Either God created them that way, or somehow over time they came to be. And it's inheritable. This is not the case in most of the world. You can't pass on race. So you can have 4 children from the same parents and they can be different races, because their race would be much more about skin color directly, but also your socioeconomic status and things like that. So you can actually change your race over time. So ours is, you are the race of your parents, and if your parents are 2 different races, then you are those 2 different races. Outer physical characteristics mean something. They tell us something about who that person is. Okay, so that's where race starts to get very, very social, and the second part, always in the United States, and pretty much anywhere in the world, this one applies. When the concept race is used, it is to rank people, rank the groups, one way or another. And you can usually, with statistics, find pretty clear evidence, and we'll look at a couple of examples today of that. So in the United States, we have this racial Pentagon, that you are one of these racial groups. In 2000, for the first time ever, the US government said, you can say you're more than one race. Until then, you could only be one race. And so for the last 2 censuses, that's the percentage of people who said I'm more than one race. Even though most people are mixed to some degree, very few people identify that way, about 2 to 3%. Okay, so what is racialization? Let me give you the definition first. It has 3 components. I write about this, that race matters profoundly. For what? For differences in our life experiences, just how we experience the world, for the opportunities that we will have, and for the relationships. Now, who we end up marrying is not by random chance in the United States. It's very much structured by this thing called race, as well as other things, of course. And keeping in line with how race is defined, it is where we allocate unequally the rewards that society has. That can be money, but it can also be status, respect, and anything else you can think of. And it's very important that it is woven in. So it's not something that just kind of sits there. It is fundamental to society. It's in the Constitution. It's in our institutions. It's everywhere. It's part of our worldview. It's part of our assumptions. We live and breathe it. We don't know we're doing it. That's when racialization works powerfully. Okay, so now compare it. What is racism? It is a changing ideology, and it has the constant rational purpose to justify the racialized society. So when we point out some data, as we will, massive inequality between the wealth of different groups, racism comes in and gives a justification for why that is okay. Usually it's because it's not really about race, that's just class. Or history takes a long time to overcome, or whatever. That's always been the purpose of racism, to continually justify racialization. Okay, what is it not? And this is how it usually gets defined in the US. It is not simply individual, overt prejudice that is irrational. Just going around driving all problems, and if we could only educate people to be rational, we could solve it. That isn't it at all. There are groups that get great advantage from racialization. It's not in their interest to change it. Last two things about racism is and it is not. It is a collective misuse of power. So it's not an individual thing. It's a misuse of a power by one group to take opportunities away from another group or to diminish them. It does not have to be intended. You don't have to purposely think I am trying to be racist here as a group, because it is embedded, as racialization is, into our everyday operations. So let me give you two examples. There are so many, because I only had a few minutes, like, which two? I don't know. Okay. So what this is showing is average income over about an 18-year period, just to show you that it's not based on this. As long as you follow this, it always looks like this. The economy changes, the groups change, but they change together, and the gaps stay. So African Americans and Hispanics, as you can see, make quite a bit less on average. These are just for males, than do white and Asians, who track together fairly closely with each other. So it's almost like you have two separate groups there. As of 2012, this is our latest, this is looking at wealth. So income is one thing, but wealth is where your real opportunities in life come from. Not just what you're making, but everything that you own minus everything you owe. So maybe you have negative wealth because you're taking out loans right now to go to school. But eventually, hopefully. So when we look across the United States, this is white folks on average have 50% more wealth than Asians. And then look at these gaps, 18 times more than Hispanic, 20 times more than African Americans. In the 1980s, those gaps were about 10 to 1, so they've about doubled since. And that's because, of course, it takes money to make money. The more money you have, the more opportunity you have to make it. You also have more access to resources and investment strategies, and people want to invest your money because you get a lot of it, things like that. Okay, this is a key graphic then to make sense of our multiracial US society. So we have on this one axis this idea of looking at society's rewards and groups being ranked on that. So initially, before we were as diverse as we are, we pretty much just had white and black, and it would be ranked like that. As we have become more diverse through immigration in particular, a new axis has been added, and it is a measure of how you are perceived as American or as foreign. So oftentimes, if you are Asian descent of any sort, you may experience that where you can be third generation. You were born here, your parents were born here, but people still want to say you speak English very well because they think you're from somewhere, and when you say where you're from, I'm from San Francisco, no, where are you really from? What they want you to say is I'm from China or something. Okay. That's that perpetual foreignness, and both Hispanics and Asians are that. So when economy goes bad, you always hear, and we have heard for generations, send the Mexicans back. Okay, it's that idea that they're not really American no matter how long they've been here. So you can see Asians are closer to whites on society's rewards, but they have a very different experience because they are perceived as foreign, and Hispanics and African Americans. Now the group, of course, that's not on there, because they don't even get involved in the conversation, is Native Americans. I track ways in which racialization happens, that we have inequality by race. And these are the ways in which you have multiple studies finding it. There are more, but to give you a sense, depending on what race you are, it will affect how long you're going to live, how often you're going to go to the hospital. Basically, every African American man is going to have hypertension and various things. It doesn't happen when they grow up in a different society. It happens when they grow up in US society. It's that profound. There are 4 steps in which we do racialization in this contemporary world, and these are them, and I can't go into much detail, but I like it because it rhymes, right? We've got to make them rhyme. I'm sorry I had 4, not 3. But we decolorate, segregate, incarcerate, and alienate. And what do I mean? Very quickly, decolorate is our current ideology, which is that we're colorblind, that race no longer matters. So we can't really discuss the issues because it's a non-starter. Segregate, that we segregate in our churches, we segregate in where we live, we segregate in many, many different ways. Incarcerate, that's been the new one since post-civil rights, where we now incarcerate more people than anybody else in the world. And the percentage of people, so the likelihood if you're Hispanic or African American that you're in prison now compared to 1980 is about 25 times greater. So that's been a change that we have done, a massive, massive change. And of course, when you incarcerate, you're a second-class citizen then basically for the rest of your life. You can't qualify for government loans, they can't give you money to go to college, you can't vote for 12 years, it's very difficult to find a job. And then alienate, so when we have immigrants, and you can see this even in presidential election discussions, we don't even use the term people or humans or immigrants, we say they're aliens. The church, of course, is racialized too. How segregated are our congregations? This is just my quickest way to communicate it. Congregations are 10 times less diverse than the neighborhoods they're sitting in currently. We get that by we have the mix in churches, and then we gather census data for the neighborhoods that they're residing in, and 20 times less diverse than our public schools. It matters what kind of congregation you're in for how diverse your friendships are. So here we're looking at 3 groups. People that attend same race congregations. So most everybody in their congregation is their race. People that do not attend congregations, and people in interracial congregations. And we're asking them, of your circle of friends, the people you like to hang out with, spend time with, what percentage of them are all or mostly your race? So look what happens here. If you're in a same race congregation, 83% of the people say, most or all of my friends are my race. If you don't go to church at all, it goes down to 70%. So church actually is another plane of segregation if you're in a segregated church. If you're in an interracial, multiracial congregation, you see a dramatic change. Only 36% of people say most or all my friends are the same race as me. And I'm just showing here white, black, Latino, Asian. You see the same impact for every group. Everybody makes more friends across race if they're in these interracial congregations. Okay, so we've spent a lot of years studying multiracial congregations, and it turns out you can have them. We have about twice as many now as we did when I started studying them in 1998. But my colleagues, many of my colleagues across the country, myself have done a lot of studies of what happens in these congregations, and one of the things that seems to be showing is you can have multiracial congregations that have whites in them, but the flavor of the congregation then will always look white. Doesn't matter the race of the pastor. You'll see it in how long the service lasts, the kind of music that is sung, the structures of the congregation. So whites seem to be able to have power in these congregations no matter what. When it doesn't work that way, let's say you're going to start a congregation and you're going to have a Hispanic preacher and an African American worship style. Over time, what we find is that whites will start there, but they will leave, and no new ones will come. So you can't maintain it. So one of the things we find, and we find the same thing in neighborhoods too, you can and we do have multiracial integrated churches and neighborhoods, but they usually don't involve whites. So that's a big challenge. All right, last slide. Martin Luther King said this: "We will be greatly misled if we feel that the racialization problem will work itself out. Structures of evil do not crumble by passive waiting. Evil must be attacked by a counteracting persistence, by the day-to-day assault of the battering rams of justice." Okay, now's the fun part. We get to talk amongst ourselves. So you should have on your table 3 questions. Let me read them, and then we'll talk about how we'll do this. Number 1, discuss the differences between racialization and racism and how they're related. Number 2, what is our task? To address racialization, or should we be addressing racism? Both? I mean, where would you start if you're trying to change something? Think about that. And how should we address it, whatever you decide we should be addressing, in our churches? So why don't you work on talking about the 3 questions together. At some point when we get far enough along, we'll then talk as a larger group about what you came up with. So go ahead.